A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. Imagine a world where being 15 minutes late to a meeting is actually a sign of respect, while showing up exactly on the dot is considered cold, robotic, and even a bit aggressive. Or a world where working late isn't a badge of honor, but a public admission that you failed to plan your day effectively. It sounds like a parallel universe, but for millions of people, that's just Tuesday. Today's prompt from Daniel is about the cultural frameworks that shape our relationship with time, punctuality, and the normalization of stress.
Herman Poppleberry here, and I have to say, Daniel really hit on a nerve with this one. We aren't just talking about time zones or daylight savings today. We're digging into time cultures, those invisible, unwritten rules that dictate when we work, how we rest, and why some of us feel a crushing sense of guilt if we aren't hustling, every waking second. By the way, today's episode is powered by Google Gemini 3 Flash, which is fitting because we're exploring how technological synchronization basically invented the modern concept of being late.
It's wild how much we take the clock for granted. We treat the 60-minute hour and the 9-to-5 workday as if they're laws of physics, like gravity, but they're actually relatively new inventions. I want to get into the why behind this, Herman, because if you go back far enough, the idea of a schedule didn't even exist for the average person.
You're hitting on the distinction between clock time and event time. Most of human history was lived in event time. You started harvesting when the sun came up, and you stopped when the task was done or the light failed. The task governed the time. But with the Industrial Revolution, we flipped that script. Suddenly, the clock governed the task. We're going to trace that shift from the factory whistles of the 1800s to the always-on digital surveillance of 2026.
But wait, how did people actually coordinate before the whistle? If I wanted to meet you for a trade or a drink in the year 1300, how did we manage that without a watch?
It was all about natural cues and social landmarks. You'd meet at high noon or after the evening prayer or when the tide turns. If you were a bit off, nobody cared because the pace of life was dictated by the speed of a walking horse or the growth of a crop. There was a massive amount of temporal buffer built into every interaction. You didn't have a 10 o'clock because 10 o'clock didn't mean anything to your biology.
And we have to look at the friction this causes today. In our globalized economy, you have monochronic cultures. The time is money. Crowd in places like Germany or the US colliding with polychronic cultures in Latin America or the Middle East, where relationships trump the clock every time. It's a recipe for massive stress and failed business deals.
It really is. There was a study by the Harvard Business Review back in 2019 that found 40% of international business travelers cited cultural time clashes as a major stressor. It's not just a minor annoyance. It's a fundamental difference in how we value human connection versus mechanical efficiency.
Let's start with that historical pivot point you mentioned. You said the Industrial Revolution didn't just change work, it changed our perception of time itself. How did a society go from, "I'll see you when the sheep are sheared," to "I'll see you at 10:07 a.m. sharp"?
It was a brutal transition, Corn. There's a foundational text on this by E.P. Thompson, a historian who wrote a 1967 essay called Time, Work Discipline, and Industrial Capitalism. He argues that before the factory system, work was task-oriented. If you were a shoemaker, you worked until the boots were finished. If it took 3 days, it took 3 days. You might work 18 hours one day and 2 hours the next.
That sounds like a dream. No one breathing down your neck because you took a long lunch to talk to a neighbor.
But that's the problem for a factory owner. If you have an expensive steam engine running, you need every worker there at the same time to make the assembly line function. You can't have the guy who makes the soles showing up at noon when the guy who stitches the leather arrived at 6 a.m. So, the factory whistle became the new god. Employers actually had to teach workers how to be punctual. In the early 1800s, punctuality was seen as a weird, unnatural discipline. People hated it.
So they literally had to brainwash people into caring about the minutes? How do you even do that to a population that has lived by the sun for 10,000 years?
You start with the children. The modern school system was essentially designed to produce punctual factory workers. Why do bells ring between classes? Why is there a penalty for being 5 minutes late to homeroom? It's not because the math is more effective at 8:05 than 8:10, it's because you're being trained to obey the clock. They use schools and churches to reinforce it. This is where the Protestant work ethic, which Max Weber wrote about, really fused with industrial needs. Hard work and not wasting time became moral virtues. If you were idle, you weren't just unproductive, you were a bad person.
I see that ghost haunting us today. The rise and grind influencers on social media are basically just 19th century factory foremen with better lighting and more followers. But there was a technological driver here too, right? The railroad?
The railroad was the hammer that nailed the clock to the wall. Before the 1840s, every town in America had its own local time based on the sun. When it was noon in New York, it might be 12:12 in Philadelphia. That worked fine when you traveled by horse. But when you have two trains traveling toward each other at 50 miles per hour on a single track, 12 minutes of difference is the difference between a successful trip and a high-speed head-on collision.
So the Transcontinental Railroad in the 1860s literally forced the creation of standardized time zones. We surrendered our local, solar time for a logistical necessity.
We did. On November 18, 1883, often called the Day of Two Noons, the railroads forced the issue. Every clock in the country was reset to one of 4 standard time zones. People were furious. Some preachers even claimed it was an attempt to change the laws of God. But the economy won. We synchronized the entire continent so the trains could run on time. We traded the natural rhythm of the earth for the mechanical rhythm of the schedule. And once you synchronize the trains, you synchronize the telegraphs, then the stock markets, and eventually every aspect of human life. We became monochronic.
Monochronic. Explain that term for me, because I think a lot of our listeners in the US or Northern Europe might not realize there's any other way to live.
Anthropologist Edward T. Hall coined this. Monochronic cultures see time as a tangible, linear, and finite resource. We spend time, we save it, we waste it. It's like a conveyor belt moving toward a cliff. You can only do one thing at a time, and the schedule is sacred. If a meeting is at 10 and you arrive at 10:05, you've stolen 5 minutes from the other person.
It feels very transactional. I give you my time, you give me your attention. But then you have the polychronic side of the house.
Right. Polychronic cultures, common in Mediterranean, Latin American, and Arab societies, see time as cyclical and relational. Time is fluid. It's secondary to human interaction. If I'm on my way to a meeting with you, but I run into an old friend on the street, it would be considered incredibly rude to cut that conversation short just to be on time for our meeting. The event of seeing my friend is more important than the clock, telling me to be somewhere else.
I can feel the blood pressure of every German project manager rising just hearing that. But there's a logic to it, isn't there? In those cultures, the relationship is the infrastructure. If you burn a bridge by being on time, you've lost more than you gained by being punctual.
Precisely. In a monochronic culture, lost time is lost profit. In a polychronic culture, a lost relationship is the greatest cost. Think about a business meeting in Mexico or Saudi Arabia. You might spend the first 45 minutes talking about family, health, and philosophy. A New Yorker would be looking at their watch every 30 seconds thinking, when are we going to get to the contract? But for the polychronic host, if they don't know who you are as a person, the contract doesn't matter. They aren't being inefficient. They are performing a different kind of due diligence.
This explains so much about the friction in global business. You're the team in San Francisco trying to move fast and break things, and they're dealing with a partner in, say, Brazil or Italy. The San Francisco team thinks the Italians are lazy or unprofessional because they're 40 minutes late and want to talk about lunch for an hour. Meanwhile, the Italians think the Americans are cold, stressed-out robots who don't actually care about the people they're doing business with.
And both are right within their own framework. That's the tragedy of it. Neither side realizes they're operating on a different operating system. The Americans are running Clock OS, and the Italians are running Event OS.
But Herman, even within ClockOS, there's this weird internal hierarchy. Like, why is it that if I'm 10 minutes late to a meeting with my boss, I'm in trouble, but if my boss is 20 minutes late to a meeting with me, it's just because they're busy and important?
Ah, that's power time. Punctuality is often a tool of status. Making someone wait is a way of asserting that your time is more valuable than theirs. It's a subtle form of dominance. In many corporate cultures, the higher you go, the more polychronic you're allowed to be. The CEO can linger over a conversation because their schedule is the one everyone else orbits around. The intern, however, has to be a perfect monochronic machine.
I want to dig into the hustle culture aspect of this, specifically how it's evolved in the last few years. We've seen this weird rebranding of overwork. It's not just that we have to be on time, it's that we have to be on all the time.
We've taken the factory whistle and put it in our pockets. With smartphones and Slack, the workday never actually ends. We've entered this hyper-monochronic state where every minute must be optimized. I was looking at some data from 2025, and burnout rates in the tech sector are staggering. Something like 83% of Gen Z workers in tech report feeling burnt out.
83%? That's not a trend, that's a systemic collapse. Does the data show why it's hitting Gen Z so hard? Is it just the technology or is it the expectation?
It's the performance of presence. It's not just doing the work, it's being seen doing the work at all hours. If you respond to a Slack message at 11 p.m., you're signaling dedication. If you don't, you're signaling lack of ambition. It's the result of what sociologists call gilding the trauma lily. We've taken the systemic pressure of a competitive, always-on economy and rebranded it as a desirable personality trait. Rise and grind, hustle harder, while they sleep I work. It's basically a way to make people feel proud of their own exploitation. If you're stressed, it means you're winning.
It's like a secular version of that Protestant work ethic you mentioned. Instead of trying to prove we're saved to God, we're trying to prove we're valuable to the market. But I'm seeing a pushback, Herman. People are getting tired of the grind.
They really are. You see it in movements like Tang Ping or lying flat in China. That was a direct response to the 996 culture, working 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. Young people just said, no, I'm going to do the bare minimum to survive because the reward for working harder is just more work and a shorter life.
I remember reading about Tang Ping. It wasn't just about laziness, it was a protest against the involution of society, right? This idea that everyone is working harder and harder just to stay in the same place.
Involution is when a process turns in on itself. Like 10,000 people competing for one job, they all study 20 hours a day, but only one gets it. The collective effort is massive, but the collective gain is zero. And then there's the buy land movement, let it rot. That sounds even more cynical. It's like, if the system is designed to burn me out, I'll just let the whole thing fall apart. It's the ultimate polychronic rebellion. I refuse to participate in your linear timeline of success.
It's a radical rejection of the hustle. But on the more organized side, you have countries like New Zealand or the Nordic nations that are consistently ranking at the top of the global life work balance index. They have strict right to disconnect laws. In some places, it's literally illegal for your boss to email you after 6 p.m.
Imagine that, a legal boundary between your boss and your dinner table. It's wild that we need laws to protect us from a piece of technology, but here we are. France was a pioneer in this. They realized that digital leash was causing a spike in heart disease and chronic stress. They decided that the right to rest was a fundamental human right that the clock shouldn't be allowed to override.
Herman, I have a punctuality paradox for you. Why is it that we consider someone late if they're 5 minutes behind a clock, but we don't consider them late if they're 5 years behind on their life goals? Like, if you haven't written that book or started that business you talked about years ago, no one looks at their watch and says, you're late. But if you miss a 10 a.m. meeting, you're an outcast.
That's a profound point, Corn. It's because the clock is a social contract, but your life goals are a personal one. The clock is how we coordinate with others, so we've elevated it to this supreme authority. We've outsourced our sense of timing to a mechanical device. We worry about the micro-time, the minutes and seconds, because those are the ones we can be punished for. The macro-time, our years and decades, is much harder to measure, so we ignore it until we have a midlife crisis.
It feels like a form of temporal colonialism. Western monochronic time has become the global standard for business. If you want to play in the global market, you have to adopt the time is money mindset. What have we lost in that process?
We've lost the ability to be present. If you're always looking at the clock to see when the next thing starts, you aren't actually in the thing you're doing right now. We've lost the siesta culture, not just the nap itself, but the idea that the middle of the day should be for rest and family, not for pushing through a 3 p.m. slump with a fourth cup of coffee. Think about the slow food movement in Italy. That was a direct reaction to McDonald's opening in Rome. It wasn't just about the food, it was about the time it takes to eat. They were saying you cannot standardize the experience of a meal.
I remember we talked about the history of the nap back in episode 1160 and how it's being rebranded as power pods for corporate productivity. It's like, even when we try to rest, we have to justify it as a way to work harder later. We can't just rest because we're human beings who get tired.
Everything has to be optimized. Even sleep is now sleep hygiene and optimizing recovery cycles. We've turned our biology into a performance metric. If you use a wearable device to track your sleep, you aren't just sleeping, you're competing for a better sleep score. It's Clock OS invading our dreams.
Let's pivot to some practical takeaways, because I think a lot of people feel trapped in this Clock OS and don't know how to switch it off. If you're working in a global environment, or even just a high-stress one, how do you navigate these different time cultures without losing your mind?
The first step is temporal intelligence. You have to realize that punctuality isn't a universal virtue, it's a cultural tool. If you're working with people from a polychronic culture, build in a relationship buffer. Don't schedule back-to-back meetings. Leave 30 minutes at the start for actual conversation about family, about life, about anything other than the agenda. That's not wasted time, it's the foundation of the work. If they show up 30 minutes late, don't get angry. Use that 30 minutes to read, breathe, or talk to someone else.
That's a great piece of advice. It's strategic empathy. You're meeting them where they are. But what about the other way around? If I'm a polychronic person working for a Swiss bank, I'm going to get fired in a week if I don't adapt.
In that case, you have to learn code switching. You have to treat the clock as a foreign language. You might not believe in the sacredness of 10:05, but you speak it fluently to survive. The danger is when you start to believe that the clock is your identity. You have to keep a private polychronic space, a time during your day where the clock is banned.
What about for the individual worker? How do we audit our own relationship with time?
I'm a big fan of the no meeting day or trying to implement event time slots in your schedule. Instead of saying, I'll work on this report for 1 hour, say, I'll work on this report until this specific section is finished. Give yourself permission to ignore the clock for a block of time and just focus on the task. It reduces that hurry sickness where you're constantly checking the bottom right corner of your screen.
Hurry sickness. I think we all have a touch of that. It's that feeling that if you aren't moving at 100 miles an hour, you're falling behind. But as we've seen, some of the most productive and happy cultures in the world actually move slower.
They do. Look at Germany. We talked about this in episode 1240. They work fewer hours than almost anyone in the OECD, but their productivity per hour is through the roof. Why? Because when they're at work, they're intensely focused on the task clock time. But when they leave, they are completely on event time. No work emails, no quick calls. The boundary is absolute. They don't have the full work culture where people sit at their desks for 12 hours, but only do 4 hours of actual work.
So the secret isn't necessarily working less. It's being all in on whatever time mode you're in. If you're working, work. If you're resting, rest. Don't let them bleed into this gray zone of kind of working while kind of watching a movie.
That gray zone is where the stress lives. That's where the burnout happens. It's the feeling of never being fully off. If you're at your kid's soccer game but you're checking work emails, you aren't at the game and you aren't at work. You're in a temporal limbo that satisfies no one and exhausts you.
This makes me wonder about the future, Herman. We have AI now, like the Gemini model writing our script today, that can handle so much of the efficiency work. Do you think this will finally lead to the leisure society people have been predicting since the 1930s? Or are we just going to find new ways to hustle?
History suggests we'll just find new ways to hustle. When the washing machine was invented, people didn't spend that extra time sitting on the porch. They just raised the standard of cleanliness and started washing their clothes more often. I worry that AI will just increase the cadence of business. If an AI can write a report in 10 seconds, your boss won't give you the rest of the day off. They'll just ask for 50 reports. We're increasing the velocity, but are we increasing the value?
That's a depressing thought, but probably accurate. We have to be the ones to set the boundaries. The technology won't do it for us. If anything, the technology is designed to be sticky, to keep us synchronized and engaged at all times.
It won't. We have to reclaim our time, and that starts with recognizing that the clock is a tool, not a master. We need to move toward temporal pluralism, the ability to switch between clock time and event time depending on what the situation actually requires.
I love that. The clock is a tool, not a master. It's like we've spent the last 200 years building this incredibly precise cage, and now we're wondering why we feel trapped.
And the cage is getting smaller. Think about micromanagement software that tracks mouse movements or how long a worker's eyes are on the screen. That's the ultimate evolution of Taylorism, the man as a machine philosophy. It's terrifying because it leaves zero room for the event time humanity that makes work actually meaningful. If you're a programmer and you spend 3 hours staring out the window thinking about a complex logic problem, a tracking software sees zero productivity. But that window staring might be the most valuable part of your week.
It's the death of the aha moment. You can't schedule inspiration for 10:15 a.m. Most of my best ideas come when I'm staring at a wall or taking a walk. Moments that a tracking software would flag as unproductive. How do we protect those moments in a world that demands constant, measurable output?
You have to build intentional inefficiency into your life. Take the long way home. Cook a meal that takes 3 hours. Read a physical book where you can't search for the keywords. These are acts of resistance against the hyper-monochronic world.
Let's talk about the colonialism of time a bit more. Because when we look at the global stage, Western business practices often steamroll local traditions. When a multinational corporation moves into a polychronic region, they don't adapt to the local time culture. They force the locals to adapt to theirs.
It's a form of soft power. If you want the investment, you have to play by our rules. And those rules are punctuality, efficiency, and growth at all costs. It's a very monochronic way of looking at the world. But I think we're starting to see a reverse colonization of sorts. High-performing Westerners are looking at things like forest bathing in Japan or siestas in Spain and realizing that they've missed something vital. They're trying to buy back the event time they sold to the industrial machine.
It's the slow movement. Slow food, slow fashion, slow living. It's a conscious choice to step off the conveyor belt. But it's a luxury, isn't it? If you're working 3 jobs just to pay rent, you can't exactly choose slow living. You're a slave to the clock by necessity.
That's the hard truth. The ability to control your own time is the ultimate status symbol in 2026. In the 1900s, the rich were the leisure class. Now the rich are the busy class, and the ability to say, "I'm not available," is the new sign of power. If you can't be reached, you're the boss. If you have to answer every ping, you're the servant.
Wow. Busy is the new status symbol. It's true. People brag about how little they sleep as if it's a sign of their importance. I only got 4 hours last night because I was closing this deal. It's like, congratulations, you're sleep deprived and probably making terrible decisions. We've turned a biological failure into a badge of honor.
And you're normalizing that stress for everyone underneath you. If the CEO is emailing at 3 a.m., the junior analyst feels like they have to be awake to read it. It's a toxic cascade. We need leadership by example, where the people at the top actually demonstrate what it looks like to have a life outside the clock.
So, what's the one thing you want people to take away from this, Herman? If they're sitting in traffic right now, stressed because they're 5 minutes late for a meeting, what should they tell themselves?
Tell yourself that late is a social construct. Obviously, don't be a jerk, try to respect people's time, but don't let the clock damage your nervous system. The world won't end because you missed the first 5 minutes of a status update. Reclaim your internal event time. Take a deep breath and realize that your value as a human is not measured in increments of 15 minutes. Ask yourself, in 5 years, will these 5 minutes matter? The answer is almost always no.
I'm going to try that. Next time I'm late, I'll just tell people I was operating on Event OS. I'm sure that will go over great with the producers. But seriously, it's about reducing that physiological fight or flight response we get when we see the numbers on the dashboard change.
Your body doesn't know the difference between a tiger chasing you and a meeting invite that started 3 minutes ago. The stress hormones are the same. We are literally killing ourselves over a calendar.
Before we wrap up, I want to touch on one more thing. The future of hustle. We've talked about AI and remote work. Remote work was supposed to give us our time back, but in many cases, it just turned our homes into offices. The boundary is gone.
It is. We've traded the commute for more on-screen time, but I'm hopeful about asynchronous communication. Tools like Slack or Loom allow us to move back toward event time. I can record a message when I'm ready, and you can watch it when you're ready. We don't have to be synchronized in real time for everything. Asynchronicity is the great hope for the polychronic soul in a monochronic world.
That might be the bridge. Technology created the problem. Maybe technology can help us solve it. Or at least give us a little more breathing room. We just have to be intentional about using it to disconnect, rather than using it to stay perpetually tethered.
I think that's the goal. Not to destroy the clock. We still need it to fly planes and run hospitals, but to stop letting it dictate our happiness. We need to be the masters of the tool, not the components of the machine.
Well, on that note, we've reached the end of our allotted time for this segment. See? Even we aren't immune to it. We've been talking about freeing ourselves from the clock while keeping a very close eye on the recording duration.
Guilty as charged, but it was a great discussion. Thanks as always to our producer Hilbert Flumingtop for keeping us on schedule, ironically enough. He's the most monochronic person I know, and we love him for it.
And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power the generation of this show. If you want to dive deeper into how we treat time, check out episode 734, The Illusion of Now, where we looked at the chaos of UTC and GMT. It's a great companion piece to this one.
This has been my Weird Prompts. If you're enjoying the show, a quick review on your podcast app really helps us reach new listeners who might be looking for a reason to slow down. Tell your friends, but don't feel like you have to do it right this second.
Find us at myweirdprompts.com for the full archive and our RSS feed. We'll see you next time, whenever the event feels right.
Good.
See ya. This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash. Text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My weird prompts, that's the flows from slow